And nice to meet you. Thank you for being so flexible with your timing. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm excited to talk with you.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I guess first, I would just like to hear a little bit about you and your background, kind of like where you started, where you went to school, and then how you got to Land O'Lakes.
Yeah, for sure. And feel free to jump in with any questions. We'll take our time. So I actually started in culinary school. That was kind of my path. So right out of high school, I went to culinary school. I went to the Cordon Bleu, and I went for baking and pastry. And I realized like very quickly that like restaurant life was not for me. Mainly because it was making the same things over and over again. So that like creative dream was like, oh, that's not really what I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really amazing chef instructor who was like, well, have you ever thought about working for like a General Mills or like a Target? I had no idea that research and development even existed in the food space. So like a million phone interviews later, I actually landed my internship because we needed one to graduate. I did an internship at General Mills. So a lot of people are familiar with like the Betty Crocker test kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So the Betty Crocker test kitchen is basically like retail stuff. So things like all of the fun recipes and cake making and salads and things like that. They have something called the Culinary Center at General Mills. It's called the Culinary Center, and it's basically all their food service offerings. So it's like a 5-pound cake mix, and they'll say like, okay, well with this cake mix you can make a cake, you can make muffins, you can make a crust, and that was my job, was to basically like edit and test recipes, and that's where I kind of learned like what tolerance testing was. Like it was like such a peek into like the beginning stages of R&D.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, like I loved it, and I was like, yeah, I want to stay. And they were like, okay, well you need a food science degree. And I was like, oh, okay. So I actually went to Kansas State, but I got my food science degree. At the same time, I was hired at General Mills, and I kind of worked my way up through research and development there. So I actually worked on Pillsbury cinnamon rolls, was the like area that I was in when I first started my career.
Mm-hmm.
I was in research and development, and when you start in R&D, it's kind of like you do I call it like the label maintenance, but like I worked on trans fat removal for like 2.5 years. Like that was what that's what I did. So it was a lot of like sodium reduction, like sugar reduction. Trans fat removal was huge at the time. And it was 2.5 years worth of doing something benchtop, going to the pilot plant, going to the actual plant, redoing it all. It was, and from there I was like, I learned a ton. I learned a lot. I worked with some really amazing people, and I realized that I really wanted to kind of blend more of like innovation with like my food science and my culinary background. So there was a role that opened up at General Mills, and I worked on this K-12 food service. So the majority of the things that I worked on will actually like never see the light of day, which is kind of funny. But it was all of the items kids could buy a la carte, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So food service providers would take like mini cinnamon rolls, and they're frozen, and then they just put them in like a warmer, and then you would, go through like the a la carte line, or they were, like bread or whatever exchange equivalent for kids. So that's what I worked on, and it was all innovation stuff. So I worked on like a lot of where my like kind of like background came into play. What I really studied when I was in getting my food science degree was like dough rheology. Was kind of like, I worked a lot on that, mainly because that was the hardest thing with trans fat removal, was the dough. So I knew a lot about dough, and when I was in the innovation role, it was really understanding like, okay, how can we essentially like abuse a dough to see all of the extremes that it can go to handle every different place that it would go. So from there, I actually I had a really great time at General Mills, and I loved it. At the time, I was going through some like health things. I actually had like in my mid-20s, I had a lot of stomach problems, And so I decided to take a break from the food industry, and I
Mhm.
did water chemistry, which is super odd. Like I totally had this like shift of like, I felt like the need to just like step away because like for
Mhm.
personal reasons I was like, I think I need to like reframe my diet, and then like I need to just like leave the food industry.
Yeah.
And so I did water chemistry, and that was for a year, and it was the most horrible year of my life. I absolutely hated it. It was
Oh
the
no.
worst. Um, Water is interesting, but it was just so not for me.
Mhm.
Um, I learned a lot. I actually ended up like the main thing that I did there in a year was I really learned a lot about logistics, like how do things get shipped, which is very odd.
Mhm.
But you know, I would run these tests on water samples, and then it was my job to take the results and then give recommendations of products that companies should use in their boilers or their condensers, or understand what the evaporation rate would be. Like it's so not like food science, like so not food science,
Mhm.
but learning how like chemicals actually get shipped and understanding what that means to like receive them and actually have like chemical inventory in place was
Mhm.
something I was totally blind to, that I had no idea like even existed. So
Yeah.
that went past, and I was like, absolutely, like this is not me. I want to go back into the food industry. So I
Mhm.
ended up, I knew a lot of people that worked at Land O'Lakes, and being at General Mills, I worked a lot with formulas, and Land O'Lakes was like, okay, well, we actually need someone to work on the specifications. And specifications are like, think of them as like the master recipe of like all of the documents you need in order to say, like, here's what I created, now the plant is going to run it.
Mhm.
So I joined the team because I actually knew how to read formulas. Because what was happening was there were a lot of people who would do more like just data entry work. They would like kind of just pass it through the system, like, yep, it's good to go. Where I
Mhm.
would actually look at a formula and be like, I don't actually think this is right. Like the water percent that you're putting in, or like, okay, if you're getting,
Yeah.
and that kind of led to the first part of my career at Land O'Lakes. I actually mapped fluids. So in like the dairy industry, we really don't say milk because milk
Mhm.
is actually like a byproduct of a dairy fluid. So I worked, which is so weird. I never knew that until I started, but
Mhm.
I mapped like dairy fluids. So for every pound of butter you make, you get 2 pounds of whey. And
Okay.
you're like, okay, well, I have more waste than I do product. So
Yeah.
what do you do with it? And so what I would do is map all of the different things. And fluids are very interchangeable. So like
Mhm.
a grade A can be a grade B, but a grade B can't be A, and an RBST3 can't be commingled, and it's like all this stuff. So like my like flow charts would just be like lines and
Yeah.
lines of just stuff. So I did that for a couple years, was actually like what I did, and it was really awesome. I learned a
Yeah.
ton about the dairy industry. While I was doing these specifications, this is like a whole mess, I started working really closely with what is considered our specialty powders team. So we have something called global dairy ingredients. So to kind of circle it back, when you have all that whey, it's really hard to move liquid because it's really expensive. So we dry
Mhm.
it. Well, then you have a bunch of whey. What do you do with it? Well, we sell, our non-fat dry milk to like Hershey. Whey can be used in other products. You can reconstitute it. You can store it. It has a really long shelf life.
Mhm.
Specialty powders is basically taking cheese and drying it. So specialty powders, what I work on is I now work on dried cheese and seasoning blends. So
Oh.
I started working with that group because they really didn't have specs in place. They were like, okay, we take cheese and like we know that the moisture needs to get hit like to here. And it's like, okay, but how do you get there?
Mhm.
Like understanding like all of the components that layer together, what testing is actually needed. And I've been at Land O'Lakes now for 5 years. And I worked it was technically an IT role, actually, what I did
Okay.
previously, because it was very like systems focused, but I worked
Mhm.
very cross functional. And then I actually knew someone in R&D, a director who I worked with at General Mills, and she was
Mhm.
like, "Hey, we have an opening for a manager position in specialty powders. Like, you should come back." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So a year ago, over a year ago, I took the job as an R&D manager, and right now, so I'm in specialty powders. I work a lot with like project management. So I work with my direct reports to understand like what they have capacity for. We do a lot of like customer fill orders. So like a customer will say, hey, can I sample your blue cheese powder? And it's understanding like, when's the last time you made it? Do we have any in inventory? It's somebody saying, okay, we work a lot with sales and marketing. And they'll say like, okay, a customer wants us to match the sour cream and onion. And then it's looking at the ingredient statement, breaking it down, like understanding all those things. So it's kind of been like, careers are really weird, like where it takes you and where you end up. But I definitely love the food industry. I will say that. It's my favorite.
Cool. That's fun to hear about kind of everywhere you've worked and everything that you've done. Does the food powders that you work on now, are those something that a consumer would see on store shelves?
Yeah, so actually, a lot of people don't know this, but Land O'Lakes, if you look in the snack category, like baked popcorn with like the cheesy popcorn, Land O'Lakes is about 80% of the like cheese powder market that you see on the shelves. Okay. So Land O'Lakes actually makes the Cheeto cheese. Like we are in contract with Frito-Lay. We make the Cheeto cheese. We have since the 80s. Like it's a huge business for us. Yeah. Cheeto cheese, we make that cheese powder. We make a lot of cheese that goes on popcorn, like purchased popcorn. We do have some that's like going into, so retail wise, yes, you'll see our products every year. It's a really unique category because most of the time when you work in R&D, it's considered like B2C business. So that's the like terminology that companies love to use. So B2B and B2C. So it means business to business or business to customer.
Yeah.
Really what it means is like, is it retail or is it food service? Where I work, it's not really either. Because literally when our product, like if I go to a plant trial, it's literally a 50-pound bag. It's a huge 50-pound bag of cheese powder. Like we would not put that on a retail shelf. Like an average customer can't buy that. But we don't sell to a restaurant because that would be considered more like it would be food service. Again, we wouldn't ship them a pallet. They would have to go through like a Cisco or something to get that one bag that they would actually use.
Yeah.
So we sell to Frito, to McCormick, to Shears, to these huge snack companies because what they do is they take our 50-pound bag and they might put it on their popcorn or Goldfish or put it in right now, like there's always areas where people want to grow the business. Cheese powder is mainly a topical application. So topical means like you just put it on as is. You might put it in a slurry, you might sprinkle it on. But when people are like, can I bake it in a dough? And you're like, well, there is oil in the product. So if you're going to fry it, there's potential for like rancidity, off flavor. So it's a lot of that. But so B2B, business to business, means I'm selling this powder, like our business, Land O'Lakes, is selling to a McCormick business. A B2C business is more traditional retail. So the business is selling to the consumer. So think of like Land O'Lakes butter. We make it, we put it on the store shelves, and a consumer can buy it. So sometimes like a product, we're like, okay, well, where, we get a purchase order and we're like, well, where's it going to go? And we kind of will know if it's a repeat order, but if it's something new, we're like, like, what final product is it going to be on? And it's like, well, did we get a product launch? Like, where did it go? And then like someone will have to seek it out in the marketplace. And then it's like, oh yeah, like we just had a big launch with Truco, which is a chip manufacturer, and they use our green chili queso seasoning. So we had a huge national launch with Truco for these green chili queso tortilla chips. So that's our most recent one.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really neat. Wait, so you were saying when you first were at Land O'Lakes, you were working on specs and you would just like look at an ingredients list and have an idea of like there's too much of this, or was that just from your experience both at General Mills and then working with water, or?
Pretty much. Like I think sometimes I have been very fortunate to work. I would say like my biggest advice, like that, like when people always kind of say like, "What's your best advice?" For
Mm-hmm.
me, it's kind of been like I have been able to be in really different areas of food. There's tons of areas in food.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of companies based here in the Twin Cities are very grain centric, I think is a nice way of putting
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
like you think about like General Mills, it's like, well, they're pretty much they're grain manufacturers. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of dough flour type applications. But on the flip side, their portfolio is huge. So they have things like ice cream, yogurt, um, snacks. Like that's a whole other non-grain realm.
Yeah.
I have been really fortunate, and it seems like every company that I have gone to really be able to learn and explore different areas. But it somehow
Mm-hmm.
all ties together. Like a lot of what I did, that foundational work of like the sodium reduction, sugar reduction,
Mm-hmm.
that's how you learn like, okay, this ingredient is really powerful. It's obviously in there for a reason. Understanding like, okay, I might not know 100%, but you learn about something and you think, okay, well, when I see that next time, I know that it's in there for a reason, and I can tie that correlation back of like, here's something that I need to pick up on.
Yeah.
So when you think of something that's dried, you're like, okay, well, if I add a lot of water in, that's the one thing it doesn't want. I
Mm-hmm.
want that water to dry out. So obviously there's something in the process that I need to understand a little more deeply so that I get that end result that everybody wants. So a
Uh-huh.
lot of it is just having that curious mind and being able to kind of tie back to experiences. I think when you're first starting in your career, you kind of think like there's a lot of label maintenance work and like you're never gonna get away from it. Every like there's projects right now on the dock that my team has that it's like, yep, it's sodium reduction. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's sodium is huge. Like sodium is never gonna go away. Everybody's gonna
Yeah.
want a clean label. That's really how the industry is moving. So that kind of maintenance work is never gonna go away. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes when you first start, you're like, like all this work
Yeah.
for sodium reduction. But it's honestly, whether or not the project goes anywhere, it's more that you understand like how it actually works in the product. And
Mm-hmm.
that, because I think really what you're doing is you have to look at it as like building your knowledge toolkit of like, okay, I might be working on sodium reduction, but maybe I'm going to talk to suppliers to understand what kind of sodium replacement they have or do a deep dive in the history of what's been done before so that I can
Mm-hmm.
understand like, okay, I get a little bit better understanding of what this can do for me in the future. So it might be 10 years later and you're like, I know I did some work on sodium before and I know
Yeah.
I looked at something that like, okay, I know what path you can start on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, what kinds of challenges would you say that you encounter like on a daily basis or most often with your work?
Time.
Yeah.
Time. Um, both in the retail and I would say like I would consider what I do right now as non-retail. So like it
Mhm.
doesn't just go on a shelf like our finished product. But time, it's really hard. Anticipating trends can be a really hard thing too.
Mhm.
Because when you actually work with the product, you kind of understand like, oh, this would be something fairly like easy and cheap. That's a key word you're gonna have to remember. Like
Mhm.
cheap is
Mhm.
good. But you really have to work with your cross-functional team to understand time because half of the time you are working on something that won't get launched for a couple of years. So your timeline could be anywhere from like a year to 2 years out, and that's like pretty conservative. Like your pipeline, like what you're working on right now, is really something that should be is future state. So sometimes when projects come in, like one just came in the other day and they were like, okay, it's a match project. Like this is a great example. It was a match project. They need it by Q1, so like January. So they
Mhm.
need it by January and it needs to be kosher compliant. The volume is actually really, really small.
Okay.
For me, when I read that brief, because that's what I do, I think, okay, Match projects are very hard. So a match project entitles their ingredient statement. They provide you an ingredient statement and they're 100-gram nutritional. And they say, you need to match this exactly. An ingredient can't be removed and nothing can be added. It has to be exactly the same.
Wow.
And that's what we have to go out. If we're lucky, they'll give us a sample of their product so we can taste it, but sometimes they don't. They take a lot of time. So unless the volume is like really, really big, it just takes too many man hours to just that fine tuning and finesse. And right now we're in a really weird state with COVID. Like lab time is at like a premium. We really have to prioritize. So the hardest part is time. Sometimes really cool projects will come in and you're like, the volume is just not there. And so we spend a lot of time, or I guess I do spend a lot of time with our sales and marketing to say like, yeah, it's just not feasible. I can't have somebody working on the bench for 2 weeks for a product that we're only going to sell 20,000 pounds. Like that's nothing. Like I'm like, unless it's like 300,000 pounds, like we can't do it just because of the time it takes. Now, sometimes you get really lucky and it's like, wow, I got pretty close and it didn't take that long. Other times, like I am working on a cheddar and sour cream thing right now. I am on version 62. It's literally my 62 version. Like, and I'm like, you know, like it's just the name of the game.
Yeah.
So just time is just the biggest thing, and understanding your timelines, because priorities are always shifting. And so it's really good. You know, Land O'Lakes was a really great cross-functional team. It's very like the culture at Land O'Lakes is very much reaching out to like sales and marketing and logistics and plans, which is really awesome. That sometimes, and it's not like a bad thing, but sometimes culture can be very like R&D stays in the R&D lane, and this is where you swim, and this is what you do.
Yeah.
In our business, it's kind of like we have to know because I could get a customer like PO today that would want a brand new seasoning, and they're willing to buy a huge volume. It's like, okay, yeah, that's that's top priority now. Whereas where when I woke up today, it's like, yep, I pretty much know where our project priority is.
Yeah.
So it's time, just trying to fit it all in. But you know, as long as you're open, it all kind of works out.
Yeah, yeah. How would you say that Land O'Lakes compares to General Mills as far as like that cross-functional component? And
I think I do feel like in the last, for sure, like, well, I don't know, I guess I should say like I have been in like the corporate America setting for like 10 years now. And I would say that in those 10 years, it really has shifted to understanding what everybody's role really is. Not giving everybody like clear actionable items, but like, okay, marketing, you're going to bring the trends and like flavor profiles that you want, you actually have to share them with R&D, because otherwise we don't know. Like we can't, you know, like it used to be where, and this was at both companies, where they, you know, like sales would be like, you know what's really hot? Spicy flavors. And you're like, okay, you know, like heat is in, you know, like it would be very generic terms like spicy, heat. And then like that was all you had to go off of. And you're like, I can go a lot of ways with that. Like, is that, you know, are you talking like jalapeno? Are you talking smoky? Are you talking like residual heat, upfront heat? Like, you know, like there's so many different questions you have. And marketing has gotten really, really good at like saying like, okay, we want a spicy profile, but we're really focused in on more of the unique flavors like habanero, ghost pepper. We want to give people an experience that is an exciting eat. We want something that like really gets their taste buds going. We want an upfront, assertive heat. We want it to be sharp. We want it to be powerful. That is a very different conversation than just spicy. So like it's actually been really good because there's been a lot of really great language communication about it's become more of an experience as opposed to just okay, what's next on deck. It's like, what experience do we want our potential consumers to have?
Yeah.
That's kind of what has been like the biggest and best change that I have experienced. The great thing about, General Mills is, everybody knows General Mills, and they're huge. Like, and it's a great company to work for. And I know I have a lot of friends that still work there, and I think very highly of them.
Yeah.
It's a fun company in the fact that there are so many different areas that you can explore. I would say it's a big company. It is a big company, so it can be a little easy to get kind of lost in the mix and see something far away that you're like, oh, that looks really cool, but it's like, how can something be so close and so far away? And it's like, it's just, you literally feel like you're like worlds apart, and you're like, how is this possible? We would work in the same company. Land O'Lakes is smaller, and the focus is dairy. Like, the focus is dairy. It's fascinating that in my mind, like, I work on cheese powder, but I still rely very heavily on my R&D counterparts in cheese to help me with my job. So it's been really fun to say, like, okay, I have a customer who wants um, like a particular flavor, like blue cheese. I was just having a conversation with a scientist in R&D about blue cheese. And it's like, okay, I really want that, like, sounds really bad, but like, I really want that like moldy mouth like feel. Like, I want there to be a really like strong, stringent flavor, but this is my price. And she's like, oh, well, you would do really well with, this flavor enzyme. And so we had a whole conversation about the cheese that would be made, but then I would dry. And it's really cool to have that, like, I don't want to say rabbit hole, but really understanding like the conceptual piece of like how things are made and what they will become. And that's really great to talk to technical people as far as, sometimes it gets down to like, this is my moisture that I made my cheese at. Like, is that possible? And sometimes it'll be like, absolutely not. And I'm like, okay, good. Like, got that question answered. Now I can move on. So Land O'Lakes is more focused on dairy, which has been like, one isn't better than the other. And I think it's good to explore too. Like, I think, when you find a job or you see something, like when you read the description, you kind of know. If you're like, that sounds really interesting. That sounds interesting. Like, that's when you should go for it. If you're like, I don't know. It's like, well, then you're probably going to be like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for students who are close to graduating, kind of looking at possible jobs and trying to decide, like, do I want to work for a big corporation, small company? Do I want to do quality, R&D?
Yeah. Well, I would say, one, it depends on your internships too, because I know that you guys are required to take internships. And I actually have had interns, and I kind of feel like interns will use an internship one of two ways. One way is to use it as like, I'm going to use this as an extended interview. Like, I literally am going to, like, this is where I want to be, and this is what, like, I'm going to show you how bad I want to be here, which is, that's fair. There's other interns that literally take it like, I don't actually know where I want to be, but I thought you were interesting, so I'm going to use this to interview you. Like, what kind of things do you have that, like, might interest me? Because I'm going to get an experience nonetheless, but I want to know if I want to be here for the long haul. One isn't better than the other. I would say that it's okay to have both of those mentalities going into an internship. I feel like sometimes it's really like, treat it like a long interview. It's like, it kind of is, but like, you really are trying to understand, like, if you can work within that company. And when you're in an internship, don't be afraid to, like, when I say network, like, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to like the quality, to a logistics. I feel like people totally underestimate logistics. Logistics is like a really weird, powerful, like, sidebar that nobody talks about. It's like very, very powerful. Yeah, it's a really fascinating little area. But as far as when you first graduate, I would say really understand, like, as you reflect on like your education and really just even your personal life, like, what are the things that you genuinely love? Most people who go into food science genuinely love food. Like, there's an element of it that you're like, most people that I find, they're like, are really about, like, I love food and I think it's really cool and I think it's interesting. And I either really like finding out what I'm eating and understanding like the structure of it, or it comes down to like, I want to know where my food comes from and how I can help the future. And again, that's a huge bandwidth. That's a huge bandwidth of things. I would say, as you're looking at jobs, think about like, one, what do you like to eat? What do you like to eat? Because not like, great, now you can eat all that, but like think about like, that's what makes you interested. Like that's what keeps you coming back of like, okay, I do want to learn more about this.
Yeah.
So one, think about what do you actually like to eat? Like, are you a snacker? Are you like, no, I love potatoes. Okay, well that's like focus more on that.
Uh-huh.
Think about the classes that you really like, the classes that really held your interest, like the ones that you were like, wow, that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the classes that you're like, okay, how can I relate that to? Certain people love food safety. They're like, that is my jam. I love it. I'm like, tell me what I need to know and I'll do it. Like that's like for me, I'm like, I love the people I work with, but I'm like, that would not be my area that I would want to go into, but other people like that. It's really kind of understanding like, okay, what sounds interesting, and it's okay if your first job isn't going to be your lifelong job. Like that's okay. Like that is okay and totally valid. Like there are people who are in a job for 40, 50 years. You don't have to be that person, and that's totally okay and fair. It's really understanding when, like I said, you see that job and you think that's really interesting, taking that opportunity. I would say my biggest thing, like if I could go back and do something different for me personally, I wish I would have gotten plant experience when I was young. So like for me, all of my plant experience was only during plant trials, or I get my plant experience is through plant trials. Land O'Lakes actually has a pilot plant. General Mills did too, which is essentially like a mini plant, small scale. But actually, like being at a plant is a totally different experience. So a lot of large companies will do like rotational programs. Like they'll do like a rotational program to say like, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about the plant.
Yeah.
I like, again, personally, I would not want to stay there for the long haul. But the way it operates is totally different from real life versus benchtop and lab time. It's totally different. So if you can gain that insight right away in your career, it totally will build your foundation faster because you're not playing catch up when you get to the plant and the operator tells you like, yeah, we just use buckets of water. We don't weigh it. And you're like, I wish I would have known that. Like, you're like, oh, or whatever it is, it's like there's kind of a reality check at the plant of like, okay, this is how things work.
Yeah.
And it's a really great way to understand like how operators work as well as the front end, like the people that actually, like the plant controllers, really knowledgeable people, and they can teach you a ton. The analytics that happens at a plant doesn't matter what plant you go to. Like those are the people that are gonna like know specs, understand what you should look for, understand like the true insides of a product, if you will. So my biggest thing is I think if I could redo my career, I would have loved to have gained plant knowledge when I didn't have like family and things that make it harder for me to be like, hey everyone, like just gonna do a quick 6 months here and then I'm roll on out. But
yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. It was great to talk with you and hear about your background, and I think it was super informative. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you have any questions or follow-up, please feel free to email. I'm more than happy to answer. But yeah, good luck and thanks so much. Yeah.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.